The rain had been falling since morning, the kind that didn't announce itself loudly, but simply arrived and stayed, soaking everything into silence. Daniel sat on the porch of the old farmhouse, turning a cold cup of coffee in his hands, staring at the field his father had left him, dry and cracked even beneath the rain, as though the earth itself had given up. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. He hadn't needed to. Grief had a way of making company feel like an intrusion. He heard the gate creak before he saw her. A young woman in a yellow raincoat, carrying a basket covered with a cloth, walked up the muddy path with the kind of purpose that didn't belong to strangers. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, pushed wet hair from her face, and looked at him without flinching. "My father said you needed a wife," she murmured, almost to herself, as though she was still deciding whether the words made sense out loud. Daniel stared at her. He set down the cup slowly. "Maybe," he said, and then something softened in his chest, something he hadn't felt crack open in months. He looked at her, really looked, and finished the sentence he hadn't planned to say. "Maybe you." Her name was Layla. Her father, old Hassan, had been Daniel's neighbor for 11 years and had watched Daniel bury his mother in spring and his father in autumn of the same brutal year. He had seen Daniel stop tending the field. He had seen the lights in the house go out earlier and earlier each night. And so, without asking Daniel's permission or Layla's enthusiasm, he had done what old men from old places do. He had sent his daughter with food and a quiet kind of hope. Layla had not wanted to come. She had her own life in the city, her own plans, her own quiet wounds she hadn't told anyone about. A broken engagement, a career she'd walked away from, a version of herself she was still trying to reassemble. She had come only because refusing her father felt like breaking the last whole thing in her life. She left the basket on the porch that first day without going inside. But she came back the next morning, and the morning after that. They didn't talk about fate or feelings. They talked about practical things. The broken irrigation pipe, the seed catalog Daniel hadn't opened, the way the old kitchen stove took 3 attempts to light. They worked side by side without declaring anything, and somehow that was the most honest relationship either of them had ever been in. Weeks passed. The field began to change. Small green things pushed up through the cracked soil, shy and determined. Daniel noticed Layla watching them one evening, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, and he realized she wasn't looking at the plants at all. She was looking at the horizon, at something he couldn't see. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Your father meant well, but you're not obligated." She turned to him. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." He didn't know what to do with that. So he did what he'd learned from watching her. He said nothing and let the moment breathe. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Layla received a phone call from the city. Her old firm wanted her back. Better position, better pay, everything she had once worked toward. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after the call ended, the phone pressed to her chest, her eyes closed. Daniel had heard everything through the thin farmhouse walls. He walked in, poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of her, and sat across the table. He didn't tell her what to do. He didn't make it about himself. He simply said, "You built something here, too." "Layla! Whatever you decide, don't forget that," she cried then, not because she was sad, but because no one had ever said something so quietly true to her at exactly the right moment. She called the firm back and asked for 2 more weeks to decide. Then she walked out to the field, knelt in the dirt, and pressed her palms flat against the ground the way she had seen Daniel do on his hardest mornings. She felt the faint warmth in the soil, the stubborn insistence of life beneath the surface, and something inside her went still in the best possible way. She didn't take the job. Not because of Daniel, and not because of her father, but because she had finally found a place where her broken pieces didn't need to be hidden, where grief and growth could exist in the same breath, where someone had looked at her honestly and said maybe, without needing it to be more than it was. And that simple honesty had turned into the most solid thing she'd ever stood. The field bloomed that summer. in a way the neighbors talked about for years. Old Hassan sat on his porch across the road and smiled at the sky without explaining himself to anyone. Daniel and Layla walked the rows at dusk, not always talking, not always touching, but always close. Two people who had arrived at each other by accident, by loss, by an old man's stubborn faith in the idea that sometimes the right life finds you when you've stopped looking for it.